This is Brandon Dean, NBA Skills Trainer and Director of Player Development for EPLAY. Over the next few weeks, we'll be putting out a series of challenges for our Hoops at Home Challenge. These challenges will simulate drills performed at our EPLAY Combines as well as drills performed at the NBA Combine. This week's challenge is the shuttle run. For this drill, you will need 3 place markers set up 8 feet apart, simulating the paint in the NBA. We will begin by starting at the middle cone. We will call this cone 1. When the clock starts, you will explode out to cone 2. Once you reach that cone, you must transition into sprinting across the lane to cone 3 and finish the drill by sprinting across the lane back to cone 2. Remember, this is timed, so every second matters. Now that you have those tips, go ahead and give it a try. Challenge yourself to be the best you can be. Look forward to seeing your results.
Now, Frank, I tell everybody if you feel it, go ahead and bob your head a little bit. It's not bad. It's a nice track to kind of come in with. Hello and welcome again. Oh,
go ahead.
See, you were getting into it, and it happens. And I tell everybody, just feel free to get into it. Again, this is the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. I am your host with each and every time. I am Jamie Horton. This is episode number 12 of the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. This is something that we've rolled out here during the last few months in what has been a global health pandemic, the coronavirus, COVID-19. And so we've found some new ways to reach out to you guys and to try and educate you guys on what it is that we like to do and what are some of the things around what it is that we're trying to do that can help educate all of us. I want to remind you guys, you just saw an opening video of Brandon Dean. He's our NBA skills trainer. We've got a virtual EPLAY Combine coming up soon, and we'll be able to give you some more information as we're allowed to when it comes to being able to give you venues and all that good stuff. But we want to tell you to go to eplaybasketball.com/hoops-at-home, eplaybasketball.com/hoops-at-home, and see how you can participate. Very special guest today. This man has been covering the game of basketball, writing about the game of basketball, watching the game of basketball for about 4 decades, going back to his days in high school. He is a 2005 inductee into the U.S. Basketball Writers Association Hall of Fame. He is the great Frank Burlison, joining us here today on the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. Frank, I mentioned the coronavirus, COVID-19, this global health pandemic, and the first thing I like to do with my guests is check their pulse, their temperature, and see how things are going with them and their families, and how you guys have been dealing with this in Southern California.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Jamie, because I went a dental appointment to have a crown removed for a new one to be made. Was scheduled to happen literally that March week where everything kind of shut down. So when you say check the temperature and pulse and all that, I actually went into the dentist, and he actually did all those things before they opened my mouth. So, I'm fortunate. We're fortunate that my wife works at a trauma hospital as my stepdaughter and my stepson's in LA County Sheriff. So they're kind of on the front line of things, and obviously they were clued in as to what we were potentially looking at. Even back in February, I was hearing things, and I'm a big reader. And when I hear about things and I got that interest, I go, this does not sound good. And fortunately, I've had several close friends, one very, very close friends who works for an NBA franchise who got it bad early in the thing. And he was ventilated face down for about 7-8 days. But fortunately, he's pulled through. And so again, it's you exercise caution. You tend to listen to the people who really know what they're talking about, and not get up too much into the political end of this, because this is not a political issue. A lot of people from both perspectives have tried to drive this into a political issue. But again, it's like hunger or crime. It's for the most part, it's not a political issue. It's a social and a health issue. And I think if people approach it like that and use common sense and understand that this is, unlike a lot of people were trying to tell us, February or whatnot, this isn't the common cold. This isn't just the flu. This is as you said, Jamie, this is a pandemic. This is something that has never existed before and has some very unfortunate parallels with, the flu of 1918 and to even a degree the HIV pandemic that hit the world so hard beginning in the 80s and still exists. So I think if people use common sense and do the proper things and are very, very cautious and guarded with not only their own lives and their immediate family, but anybody they come into contact with, when in fact, as seems to be happening now, more and more opportunities are to go out and be in public and interact, certainly at a more limited degree.
Yeah, I think the one thing we can all rally behind or agree on is that we all want our damn sports back, Frank. I miss basketball. I want to watch the playoffs right now. And I know this is bigger than sports, but I think one of the things that we can all hope to see in the near future is the ability to watch our favorite teams and athletes get back out on the floor, get back on the ice, get back out on the baseball diamond, and then hopefully by the fall we'll get some football. But Frank Burlison, EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story. He has been doing this for a very long time. I believe since you were 17 years old, you started writing about basketball or be a sports writer at the age of 17. One of the things I like to do, we like to tell people's basketball stories here at EPLAY. I'd like to get behind the curtain of Frank Burlison and tell me a little bit about your basketball story, starting from then and to where we are right now.
Well, Jamie, like I said, mentioned when I was in high school, a really quick story because it's journalism and being working for newspapers for a long part of my life, and Fox Sports actually involved when I was a fall semester of my junior year in high school at Gar High, which is now in Cerritos, a suburb of LA, if you want. I took chemistry because, like people in the 70s, you got to take 2 lab sciences to go to a UC school or a Cal State University system in California. So you take your 2 labs, your 2 maths, or 3 Englishes, your social studies, or whatever. So I had taken biology and did okay as a sophomore. In junior year, I took chemistry, and again, I was a good enough student in high school that I didn't have to work real hard, and I would wait till the night before, the day before something was due to prepare for that. Well, lo and behold, I get chemistry, and it didn't work that way. So first semester I failed chemistry. So lo and behold, I got sent to my counselor, and my high school counselor said, well, you gotta, can't take chemistry for the second semester. And I said, well, good suggestion, because I certainly don't want to. So they said, we're leafing through the thing of electives. And, I was a big sports fan. Obviously, I'd played a little baseball, but huge sports fan. I think we took like 3 newspapers when I was a kid, and I read everything that was, sports pages. So I was, a guy who just, devoured everything, any sports magazine or any kind of publication. And then we roll across it, and it says journalism. And I said, journalism, isn't that like writing a newspaper? He goes, yeah. And I says, well, so like, what do you do? He goes, well, you learn how to. I said, is that sports writing? He goes, yeah, you take the class and you learn the basics of journalism, and you get to work for the school paper. And I said, okay, I'll take that. And I'll never forget, the advisor, they called her an advisor for this particular class, which was journalism, was Mrs. Witten. I think her first name was Nancy. I'm sure, she's long gone, but 45 years later or whatever. So I took this class, and I also had her for an English composition class. So this woman taught me how to write and the basics of journalism. And while I was taking for another class, I actually learned structures of essays and writing and things like that. So one day, then it was the Long Beach Independent Press Telegram, where I went to high school. We were considered one of their area schools because they did a great job of covering high school sports. And they would literally send letters to all the school paper advisors for, 50, 60 high schools within the area, and saying, hey, do you have any students who might be interested in coming to work at the newspaper and covering high school sports and working on Friday nights, which was the big high school football night, and the nights for basketball. And she recommended me. So, called and gave my name. And I remember I didn't even have my driver's license at the time. I was 16, and I got a neighbor my mom and dad couldn't do it. So I got a neighbor who would drive me all the way to downtown Long Beach, was about, 18 miles from where we live. And I went in and, got interviewed and got hired. So for a couple of years, I, would come in on Friday nights or take phone calls, people calling in the results of their high school football or basketball or baseball games. And, back then it was just still manual typewriters for a while. So that's how I got it started. And I would cover high school sports. And I just always had a passion for basketball. So I would cover high school basketball games. And, unique, interesting situation back then is NCAA schools, there was very little in the way of recruiting rules. So college coaches or recruiters could go out the year round. They could literally go watch guys every night, of the season, or be it the regular season or spring leagues or fall leagues or summer leagues, which, there certainly weren't as many of them back then. But that's how I learned. I started meeting college coaches and developing relations with them. They'd write me, and, I could call them and they'd help me out. And over the course of meeting high school coaches and covering high school athletes, eventually these guys go on to college to become college coaches or college players, and some of them go on to the NBA as players or, coaches or general managers. So over the course of, going on 50 years now, I developed a lot of relationships with people in basketball and just covering the high school level as I did. And then, again, there's still probably 8, 9 GMs and a half, there's a bunch of NBA coaches that I covered when they were high school players. So over the course of years, you meet people and you develop relationships. And that's where I kind of ended up where I was today, where I was still like 20. And I had met a late guy, great guy, a jeweler in New York in the 70s. He wrote for Basketball Weekly, and he wrote like their high school sports coverage, high school basketball coverage. And again, there was no internet and, phone call. If you tried to call somebody, it would, from Southern California to New York, it would cost you $8 a minute. So I would write letters to people. I would go to newspapers at the library, look at the sports sections and see who wrote a lot about high school or did, their all state teams. And I would write them letters saying, hey, I'm interested in basketball. I love to cover. And they, a lot of them would write you back. And again, a guy named Bob Lapidus wrote me back, and I got to have a relationship with him and called him a few times. And my mom didn't mind when we get a phone bill for, $10 for a 5-minute calls. And he had the contacts and they started McDonald's All-American Selection Committee. And they wanted to have somebody for across the region. And Bob, who was good friends with Howard Garfinkel and recommended me. So, they said, okay, they wrote me and called me, you want to be on the committee? And here I was 20 years old. Sure. So, that first year that we would have conference calls for the longest time, and we'd say, okay, who's the best players in the West? Who should be McDonald's All-American? And we'd, kind of bat it out that way. And then, so the first year they had an all-star game, which was kind of in that format. And it was in Landover, Maryland, and it was then called the Capital Classic. So I flew back there, and great players, a lot. Again, the media stuff that you read about high school players was either in the local newspapers or, Street and Smith magazines or, Scholastic sports magazines. And so you knew about the guys from New York, Albert King and Eugene Banks. King was New York. And then there was also a great player, supposedly great player from Michigan, who I had met a summer before, going to the first ever Vegas tournament I went to. I think they had 8 teams. And assistant coach at the time from the University of Michigan, I was sitting with a UNLV assistant at the time who I'd known since I was 16, 17. And he's telling us about this great player from Michigan. At the time, of course, Jerry Tarkanian was the coach at UNLV, and he told Lynn, who was Lynn Archibald, the assistant, hey, you got to come see this kid play. And he's a great player. He goes, you won't get him, but he'll go to Michigan and Michigan State. But since you watch him play, you haven't seen anything like him. So I, mentally noted the player's name. I had heard of him. And then that following spring, April, I think, I think that was the first time I'd flown coast to coast, went in and watched the practices, and I saw this particular kid, and I'm thinking, whoa, Nelly, the coach was right. This guy's on a different level. And I knew who he was, but I suddenly realized he was way better than Albert King, Eugene Banks, a kid named Wayne McCoy, Jeff Ruland, Jeff Ruland played in the NBA for a long time. And I'm watching play, and then they have the All-Star game, the actual game itself, and he just dominated. He was of course, when I got back to the paper, the boss says, sure, you want to write columns about it? And I wrote about players, saying I had never seen a guy like that, and I had grown up watching the NBA in the 60s and 70s and, followed the NBA very closely and college basketball closely, and I had never seen anybody like him. And I guess, 45 years later, or 40, because this was 77, so let's just say almost 43 years later, I think my evaluation of Irvin Magic Johnson was right on, because when he was 17 and 6'8" and about 210, he did things that you just hadn't ever seen a basketball player do, be it in college basketball, be it in the NBA. And again, he was 17 years old, and I told everybody, I said, hey, this is the best high school player in the country. It's not these other guys who had more national hype, if you will. And again, and history has shown that I think Magic Johnson, as much as Wilt Chamberlain or Michael Jordan to an extent, and certainly Larry Bird in terms of what he did to bring the popularity of the NBA to a different level, certainly had, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of course, another, the most probably unstoppable shot ever developed in basketball with the skyhook. So again, that's one of the things Jamie, we were talking about things that just stick in your mind. I mean, I could remember just watching those practice sessions. Bob Knight was there, and I think Dean Smith and everybody were watching it. Rick Majerus at the time, who became a dear friend, was an assistant coach to Marquette at the time, and who I met there, and remained a dear friend and a mentor until he passed away 3 or 4 years ago. So that's one of the things. I mean, and again, there's multiple players through history that I could remember the first time I saw them, or the impact that they had on me at the time, and what I thought about them. And because nowadays when I see a player or a very young player, my mind automatically, okay, who does he remind me of? And I tend to think of guys, high school guys. You think of their high school game. Try not to say a guy's going to be the next LeBron or the next Jordan or the next Magic or things like that, because that's rushing a little bit and unfair on the athletes. So, but again, when you see a kid like that and so dynamic, which is why I still have, I think, quite the passion for watching high school basketball or club basketball or grassroots basketball. Again, I covered the NBA several different times in my stint as a sports writer. Lakers, and before I left the newspaper business about 9 years ago, I covered the Clippers for 3 or 4 years. But again, when you see a young player who may be not known, and you see the passion that they play with, and you see the incredible innate athletic ability they may have, or the basketball skills that are kind of unique to somebody that young, it really kind of stimulates you. It gets you excited and gets you pumped up, and kind of gets that adrenaline flowing. I'm sure, not unlike, or certainly a lot like, somebody who loves movies or loves cinema, sees a young director, or think back to the 90s with the Quentin Tarantino movies, or way back in the 70s when Scorsese was just making movies, or music. The people, I'm sure, that hear all the bands for the first time, or NWA here, was West Coast rap was kind of born in Compton and Long Beach in the late 80s, and just there, NWA or those kind of things where you see potential greatness as it's developing, and really kind of inspires you.
Again, Frank Burlison joining us here on the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. Frank, again, 2005 Hall of Fame inductee into the United States Basketball Writers Association. Did I say that right? I think it's U.S. Basketball Writers Association Hall of Fame inductee. Yeah, 2005. Been around the game of basketball and around sports for a long time. Seen a lot, and that's what we want to talk about now, Frank. Because you'd mentioned your ability, or the privilege, the experience of watching Magic Johnson play basketball as a 17-year-old. Is that when you go, I can evaluate? I can. How do you become a talent evaluator at that point? Obviously you're writing about guys and you see it, and then it becomes a story, it becomes a narrative.
Yeah.
How does that translate into becoming a talent evaluator? Is that when you knew you could do it?
No, because again, to me, and I think anybody who really understood basketball saw that and said, "Oh yeah, he's better than." I just think, like anything, you have to do it for a long time, and I think over the course, you're right and wrong. Sometimes you think, this guy's going to be good, and again, there's a lot of factors that enter in how an athlete, like anything in any endeavor, how he progresses or she progresses, and that particular sport. Again, it changes, kind of on the same vein. I was telling somebody the other day, I worked at the Long Beach paper in the 80s and 90s. We had a great local section, which was not necessarily high school, but we had a couple great writers or hard workers who would write stories on local athletes. They might be middle school, or they might be a sport that wasn't particularly a high profile. It wasn't basketball, football, or baseball. And I remember Pam Lewis, who was on our staff at the time, then she ended up going to the Oakland paper and has been married for 20 years. But at the time she did a feature, Compton was one of our, right near Long Beach, so Compton was one of our communities or schools. There was 3, Centennial, Dominguez, Compton, 3 high schools in Compton, so we covered them a lot. And I remember Pam Lou did a big feature on a couple sisters who were pretty good tennis players, the Williams sisters, when they were like 12 and 11. So we did a big feature on them, and they were kind of like our athletes as they we consider them our athletes because, they were from our circulation area, and we wrote about them. And a good young golfer who lived in Cypress area, which was about 4 or 5 miles from the Long Beach border, some guy named Woods. Do you remember him at all? A golfer? He went on to Stanford. I don't know what he did after that, but he was a pretty good golfer at the time. So I think he ended up playing professionally, but I could be wrong. I don't follow it that closely. But you see athletes like that at that age, and you go, wow, they're different. I mean, there's different. Again, there's a lot of great, I hate to use that word great, but there's a lot of tremendous athletes at young ages, but the really, really special ones transcend that age or what you saw them and just carrying it on all the way through, whatever the professional level is. And you see a guy like Magic, you see, I saw LeBron when he was young. He came down to Southern California with a team from Northern California, even though he lived in Ohio. And you see guys like that and you go, unless something really screws up, unless I'm really wrong, or unless something happens physically or off the court or away from the field of action, be it motivation, be it health, be it whatever reasons, injuries, you could say, hey, unless something really is crazy, this person has a chance to really, really be good. Now, you never think, even when I saw Magic, you never think, oh, he's going to be the most greatest dominant point guard in history. You don't think that. You don't think LeBron's going to be, arguably the best player in basketball for 10 to 12 years, just like Kobe. You thought, like, he's going to be good. But again, you try not to project someone as being so good because, again, so many things. Even Michael Jordan, I saw in high school. I saw a bunch at Carolina. Then in '84, my newspaper was part of the Knight Ridder chain at the time, which was Detroit Free Press, Miami Herald, bunch of papers. And the Olympics, the Summer Olympics in '84 were in LA. And I fortunately covered basketball, men's and women's basketball. So my boss at the time, Jim McCormick, said, the NBA, the men's Olympic trials, back then, of course, people remember it's only college players. So for the most part, non-NBA players could participate. So I flew back to Bloomington, Indiana when Bob Knight was the coach, and for like 6 or 7 days. So I was there. I think they started out with like 82 players. So I was there for the whole week and saw the trials, and Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, before anybody really kind of knew how dynamic he was, and John Stockton, when he was just a little small school at Gonzaga, and Alvin Robertson, and a whole bunch of players who were great players. So I had the great fortune of being able to, the late Wayman Tisdale, another great player, the great fortune to be there for a whole week and basically watch a couple practice sessions every day and scrimmages and big scrimmages that they would actually have in Assembly Hall and Bloomington. So, and then of course, then they come to Long Beach in that summer, and for 2.5 weeks I covered the Olympics. So I got to see Jordan and all those guys play. And again, you see Jordan and he's so good. I mean, by that stage, even watching the Olympic trials, as good as he was in 3 years at Carolina, you watch him in the Olympic trials and you realize, he's on a whole different level of even a lot of guys who are in the NBA. But again, you don't see him and think, oh, he's going to be the greatest player of all time. You think he's going to be a hell of an NBA player and he's going to be an all-star, he'll be an all-pro, but you're not presumptuous enough to say, oh, he's going to be the greatest player of all time. But again, you see those guys. So, and today, not that I compare every player I see to Jordan or Magic or LeBron or Kobe or any of the hundreds of great basketball players I've been fortunate enough to see at a very early age. Do you say, oh, they're going to be the next guy like this? They have a chance to be very, very good. And then certainly when you see them go on to college, or in this case, a lot of guys don't go to college, but when you see them play, you say, yeah, I guess I was kind of right,
No, I have a similar story. I used to cover high school sports and was a play-by-play guy, and I watched a kid named Patrick Mahomes in high school.
Yeah.
Throw for like 4 or 5 touchdowns in the first half. He set out the entire second half. The team I was covering there in Marshall, Texas, a shout out to the Marshall Mavs. At that time was a rebuilding and young program. So it was in that White House program with Patrick Mahomes and another kid that he had there that went on to Texas Tech with him. But that was one of the few times where I go, I think I'm looking at a professional athlete. And even then I was thinking, I didn't know how good he was going to be then. I mean, you could tell he was different. He was better than everybody else, but you didn't. It's one of those deals though where you spot it and you go, yeah, he's that kid's got a chance to make money playing professional sports one day, because he beat us on the basketball court. He beat us on the baseball diamond. He threw a no-hitter against us too. He could have played baseball if he wanted to. So that's the only experience I have, Frank, of seeing somebody where I go, that person can make a living doing this kind of thing. Frank Burlison, again, with us here on the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. Frank has been scouting talent for a long time. 2005 United States Basketball Writers Association Hall of Fame inductee. I know that you have seen a couple of guys that were MVPs back-to-back years here recently. And Russell Westbrook, James Harden was at 17 and 18. The Southern California area is chock full of talent, right? We see it. We know that it's there. There's a lot of really good basketball being played in Southern California. Folks from Maryland, if anybody's seen the Basketball in the Water documentary about Prince George's County in Maryland, would maybe argue with you there on that one. But there's a lot of good basketball that gets played in Southern California. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the guys that you've had the privilege of seeing kind of come up through the ranks there in Southern California, and you were able to go, that one's going.
Yeah, you mentioned certainly James Harden and Russell Westbrook, and now with the Spurs, DeMar DeRozan. It's interesting, and Kawhi Leonard. They all and Klay Thompson. They were all kind of clustered in this, I think, over the course of 2 high school classes in Southern California. So most of them played against one another. Their high school teams would play against one another, and the playoffs or tournaments, November, December tournaments or whatnot. But we have in Southern California, like I think most large areas, including certainly the Dallas Metroplex area and the Houston area, and then you go into Michigan, Detroit, Chicago and beyond, and New York and Philadelphia. We're blessed, the basketball people like myself, to basically watch basketball, highly competitive high school basketball, the year round. I mean, basically year round. There's the regular season, which, December, early, late November, early December, depending on, the particular region, through basically March. And then it literally goes to spring leagues, to summer leagues, to club competition, to big camps. Like, I'm involved with, it's interesting when you talk about things we're missing. I'm just thinking tomorrow, for the last 18 years, the Pangos All-American Camp, which basically has top high school players in the country, come to Dino Stragonis, who runs it. It would have been in Southern California, and I've seen 60% of the first round picks in the last 10 to 12 years have played in that camp. And then in June, I work for Coach Lucas, a dear friend of mine, John Lucas, another mentor. He runs the NBA Players Association All-American Camp, Top 100 Camp, which for the last 7-8 years has been in Charlottesville at the University of Virginia. And that's another one that would have run middle of June. And, I helped select those players for those 2 camps. And really the two of the 3 or 4 big, can't miss, if you will, for people like me, events to go to. And, obviously, barring something radically happening here in the next month or so, aren't going to exist. which is a shame. So it's tough. But again, getting back to California, Southern California, I saw guys like all these guys playing when they're, James Harden and Russell Westbrook. I know their high school coaches. I know very well. Scott Pera was James Harden's coach, and now he's at Rice University as the head coach. And Reggie Morris Jr., who was Russell Westbrook's coach, and Darrell Wright and DeLon Wright and Amir Garrett, the left-handed pitcher for the Cincinnati Reds. He coached all those guys. He's a dear friend of mine. So I had a chance to see all these guys. Klay Thompson, his high school coach is retired now. He's a good friend of mine, doesn't live for him. So I'm able to see all these guys, not only see them in isolated situations, but again, we're fortunate here, and I'm fortunate for what I like to do is all these guys have played against each other. Kawhi Leonard and DeMar DeRozan and Klay. I mean, I remember when I was still working for the Long Beach paper, which I haven't, it's been 9 years since I left the newspaper business, but I remember a playoff game I covered, division, Southern California, Southern Section Division I playoff game, a round of 16 quarterfinal game. And I remember I covered at Compton High, and it was DeMar DeRozan playing against Klay Thompson. And again, both these guys, I think they'd already signed. DeMar had signed with USC, in the fall, and Klay Thompson had signed with Washington State. And so I'm literally watching in a high school gym courtside, 10 feet from the court, watching Klay Thompson and DeMar DeRozan. Again, it's the same thing. You think those guys are going to be terrific. Klay Thompson, especially as a shooter, he was just so phenomenal. And even at that stage, he was vastly underrated. DeMar DeRozan was probably still a little bit underrated, but he had been a McDonald's All-American. Klay Thompson was even a McDonald's All-American. You watch these guys, again, playing against each other, and you see a Kawhi Leonard playing against, the elite players. And, Russell Westbrook was a guy who was, I remember as a sophomore, I got him into one of these Pango camps, and he was like 5'8", 5'9". But even at that size, again, this is where you kind of learn to evaluate what the kind of things you look for in young players. Even though he's just 5'8", 5'9", I think he was wearing size 13 feet. He had arms, long arms, big feet. And even when he was in the lane, you would see he would be in traffic, and he'd kind of just reappear above everybody and lay it in. I thought, whoa. And then, he grew to about 6'2", and then Jordan Farmar went pro, and so UCLA needed a guard, and Ben Howland at the time, UCLA's head coach, good friend of mine, and he had known who Russell was. I said, hey, you got to take him. So they picked him up in the spring, and then, played a lot as a freshman, then, break through as a sophomore, and then again, kept growing. So he went to UCLA about 6'2", and by the time he left, I think he's 6'4", and what he is now. And Davis, another kid I was able to see who played in the NBA for a long time, and had a lot of knee injuries that ultimately kind of sidelined his career to what it might have been. But kid I saw when he was 7th, 8th grade. I remember Baron Davis in 9th grade went to Crossroads High in Santa Monica, which is actually a school where a lot of actors and Hollywood people send their kids to. Jessica Alba and people like that went there, and I saw him. He was like 5'3", 110 pounds as a 9th grader. But again, long arms, big hands, big feet. So you see all these things that you say, hey, if he grows 6-7 inches, he's going to be a terrific player. And he did. I'll give you another example of that whole size thing. About 4 years ago, there was a really good team here in Southern California. High school team ended up going 35-0, and they had a McDonald's All-American and 2 freshmen who were starting, and it was Chino Hills, Lonzo Ball, who was 6'4" at the time, and his team went 35-0, and he went to McDonald's game. We ended up going to UCLA, and now with the New Orleans Pelicans with Williamson and another guy I saw a bunch, Drew Holiday, and his whole family. And at the time on that team, he had a brother who was like 5'4" as a freshman. And everybody said, well, he's too tiny. He shoots set shots. He's a little goofy kid. He was 13 at the time. And again, I said, well, what if he grows? And people say, well, he's little. He's a sophomore. And he's only 5'8". I go, well, his dad's 6'5". His mom's about 6'1". He's going to grow. And, lo and behold, now Melo Ball is 6'6" or whatever. And could be, certainly is going to be top three, might be the first guy picked in August or whenever the draft is. So a lot of people tend to look at, I tell you, this is a rule of thumb I have. I think not just me, but anybody, be it NBA scouts or college scouts, a lot of people can watch a basketball game and you say, okay, who's the best player on the court? My wife could do that, who didn't know a whole lot about basketball before she met me 15 years ago. She could watch the game. I won't tell who to watch. I'd say, okay, who's the best player on the court? In a high school game, she could do that too. But the key is, who's the player on the court that's going to be the best player 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5 or 6 years from now? That's where I think separates the people who really have an eye for talent, because again, anybody could, if you know the sport, you can watch and say, hey, that guy's good. But the real trick for college coaches and people who do it for a living in the NBA is saying, okay, who do we draft that's going to be good 2, 3 years from now, and maybe, have much more, the most overused term in sports these days, upside. So that's what you kind of look for.
Frank, you did a perfect job, because that's a great segue. Because the elephant in the room here is at EPLAY, we're an analytics company. Obviously, we're familiar with you. We're all familiar with each other. And I guess you could say the problem for a long time was sort of finding a marriage, finding that sweet spot between the naked eye scouting, which we agree here at EPLAY, that never goes away. That will never, ever change. The ability to see what a person's physical attributes are on the floor never goes away. But the numbers side of it would say, hey, this guy with all this size and everything else, the numbers tell me he's a terrible rebounder and is turning the ball over a lot and is prone to not shoot a high percentage and things like that. So we've always felt like we just wanted a seat at the table. Obviously, you've seen the evolution of the athletes that have played the game and the way that the athlete is now scouted and looked at. Where is that marriage, and where could that tie in? Where could you, as you said, go and say, this guy is the best player on this floor in high school, but who is the best player 3 to 4 years down the road based on naked eye as well as numbers? Is there a marriage there, and what, if so, where is it?
Absolutely. I think what people, again, and I think the majority of the NBA people that I know, and I have lots of dear friends who work in the NBA, and for what I do now is I have a scouting service for college programs across the country and for a lot of the NBA franchises, and I think their perspective is kind of the way I see it, and I think most people do, is analytics or film analysis or digital analysis or projecting. That's just one of the many tools. I mean, like scouting, you can't, I'll give you an example. Let's just say somebody like me or an NBA guy, for an example, goes and watches a college player and sees him in 4 or 5 games and just says, God, he shot the heck out of the ball. I saw him get, dribble, penetrate, get to the rim anytime he wanted to, hit 3 or 4 threes. Shot was a little unorthodox, but he hits those 3 and you see it. But you don't see the other 16, 17, 18, 19 games where he couldn't get himself open. When he was pressured, he couldn't hit his shot. His shot would break down. So again, if you don't see every game, you're somehow limited to, and it could work the reverse. You see a guy 2 or 3 times, is that, and I had guys tell me this about Kawhi Leonard when he was at San Diego State. Can he ever shoot the threes? He's shooting 20%. And I had seen him in a lot of high school games where he nailed threes. In fact, his junior year, he was more of a perimeter player. So I had seen him hit threes lower from the corner. But again, if you're limited in what you're using to analyze a guy, you can't. If you limit yourself to, he didn't shoot it when I saw him, or, geez, I see his stats and he's shooting 40% from the threes, he must be a good 3-point shooter. If you weigh too heavily on one aspect, be your eyesight, or what people tell you, or stats on a particular game, or stats versus the best competition, you're kind of limiting yourself and opening up yourself to potential misconceptions or bad decisions or bad assumptions. So I think a parallel, for example, would be people who, let's say the NFL. I'm sure a lot of people, obviously Dallas and Texas, big NFL and football season. NFL guys, are they going to just say, okay, we're just going to watch games in person at the University of Texas or Oklahoma or Alabama or LSU? Is high level of program, are we just going to watch their games in person or their films of those games and make our decisions based on that? Oh, heck no. They're going to have a combine, NFL combine. They're going to watch guys at drills. They're going to watch all the measurables. And then they're going to work them out on their own. Then they're going to do loads and loads of interviews and background checks going on, which is what a lot of my NBA clients do. They'd say, talk about guys when you saw them when they were 15, 16, what can you tell us about their families and things like that. So NFL is going to use all those elements, and they're all going to be part of a decision. I think, I can't really speak to baseball because, my baseball, how guys could figure out who can hit fastballs and curveballs and who can get guys out. I can never figure out. But basketball and football, I have a pretty good idea. Same thing with basketball. NBA guys are going to watch college guys when they play in college. They're going to get as much video or whatever limited amount of times they can see when they're in high school. They're going to watch practices. They're going to, certainly the pandemic, COVID-19 issues have prevented them from, the combines in Chicago or individual workouts or group workouts, which a lot of agents put out. They haven't had those tools to make their decision, which I think is going to make this NBA draft potentially one of the most interesting ever. So again, I think, even the NBA teams that were in the past were pioneers, Daryl Morey and people like that. I think they're certainly not going to say, okay, we don't trust our scouts. We don't trust our veteran scouts who have good eyes to make decisions or to have input. You're going to say, hey, we want every bit of input we can. Again, using the NBA an example, I mean, you think about a first round, what's at stake when an NBA team franchise makes a first round selection, especially those that are picking, in the lottery, if you will, top 14 or, top 3 or 4 picks. You think of what's at stake. You think of all the money that has been spent over the course of 1 or 2 years to send your scouts and your GM and your personnel directors to fly across, to go to Hawaii, Maui Invitation, for example, 8 teams, a lot of high profile NBA prospect to go there and over the course of 15, 16, 17 games that you're watching in person. That's a whole lot of money. And then you go into the draft and you're spending money on background checks and scouting services or consulting people. And then you make a bad draft and suddenly, okay, we screwed up. You have 2 bad drafts. You make 2 bad picks in a row. People get fired. Scouts get fired. GMs get fired. Coaches get fired because you're not winning. Those decisions translate are part of the element. Obviously, free agency and things like that go into 2 that translates into down the road certainly, or in some examples immediately, like Magic Johnson going way back to the 79-80 season with the Lakers. Those have impacts. So you want every bit of information, be it technical, be it new information, the new way of scouting, the new way of analyzing players, the new technology, to the old school, to the people who grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s and sat in gyms for hours and watched players and took copious notes and then called people and had relationships with coaches or trainers or all the people that they contact and to try to fish information from that can make the process as complete as possible and as accurate as possible.
Again, visiting with Frank Burlison here on the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. Frank is a 2005 Hall of Fame inductee into the U.S. Basketball Writers Association. Has been around in sports and the game of basketball for 4 decades. We'll just say that, right? So it's been around a long time, right?
4 decades.
Close enough. But during that time, obviously, the evolution, the things that you've seen, the athletes have changed. The game has even changed. I think analytics can be something you could look at as how some of the game has changed in terms of, one would argue, maybe the disappearance of the mid-range game in some aspects, right? Threes and layups and things like that. In terms of how you apply it, right? How it's applied just as from the scouting perspective. Again, you have the naked eye aspect, and you mentioned this is going to be a draft that's, who knows, this could be where folks like me and our company sort of has the opportunity to get that bigger seat at the table and say, here's what our models say about this basketball player, et cetera, plus the video and everything else. In terms of that implementation, Frank, give me an idea about how you would implement the analytics into evaluating a player right then and there. Like if I've got some tape and I've got some numbers, how would you implement those numbers?
Well, I could use as an example. Last couple of years, we've had Ryan and EPLAY involved with this. The number one, I humbly say, the number one best post-Christmas real high school competition, not club or spring or grassroots or whatnot, tournament in Southern California, which is called the Classic at Damien. We just in December, late December, was our 4th annual one, and we're going to have our 5th, COVID-19 willing, this December. So when I had a chance to meet Ryan, I wanted to get him involved with the tournament, and for the statistical ability to, in our top 2 divisions, which were on the Damien Classic, 32 teams, playing 8 games in each division a day for 4 straight days. I wanted to get him and the company involved because I saw the value of it. Obviously, the obvious thing, short term, is statistical, because you have, their callers or their people who are statting the games, have the ability to, if you're following them on the app, you could see in real time, the statistical breakdown as it's happening. God, if you're a fan who wants to take it, or a parent or whatnot, or somebody who has access, you could say, God, that kid's hit a lot of shot. And you can say, oh, that's right, he's hit 4 threes in the last 10 minutes or whatever. And then at the end of the game, if you're a traditional media type or scouting type person, or a website type person, or somebody who's looking at the games to write it for a traditional newspaper or website, if you will, just, the aspects of the game, you could use the statistical readout for, okay, how many points did a guy have, how many rebounds, how many turnovers, what he shot from Phil. So you can integrate that into your coverage. Or if you're a person like myself, or a scout, or a college person, or a parent, or someone who has a more in-depth need for, or desire to see a more elaborate statistical breakdown, because you could use that and look over the course, especially if you have a feel for the level of competition that was involved in the game. I think those stats tend to have more pertinence, because again, if hey, this was against a good team and this kid went 10 for 14, he turned it over one time and he had 5 of 6 threes, and they were playing against a good defensive team with multiple other good college players, prospects, if you will, you say, okay, that's good. Now go to 4 games. And like I say, our platinum division and gold division, and I think in those 2 divisions last December, I'm just among the seniors, which are about 40% of the players that are playing it. I think there was like 38 or 39 players in the gold and platinum divisions, platinum and gold, the 2 top divisions, who went to D1 programs. A big hunk of them went to the power conferences, if you will. So you could take a play, if you're a college coach, you could say, I got to watch one game, but here's his stats, here's his breakdown. He shot, a couple of guys that helped get scholarships. There's one kid, Anthony Roy from Dublin High, which is Northern California, wasn't being recruited at all heavily, didn't have a big name, but he comes down, he played in our top division. I think left-handed kid ended up hitting about 15 out of 24 threes in 4 games against good teams. He's playing against Rancho Christian with Evan Mobley, Fairfax with Keith Dinwiddie, who's going to San Diego State. Mobley, who's going to SC, could be the number 1 pick in the 2022 draft. So, and I directed these coaches to the website and say, hey, look at this kid, Anthony Roy. Here's his stats breakdown. And again, he ended up going to the University of San Francisco, ironically, which is like 25 miles from where he went to high school. So that's an example of how I think, short-term college coaches, college recruiters can use this service as, again, another element. Because, again, no coach I know is just going to pull up Frank Burlison's thoughts and just offer a kid scholarship and say, okay, we don't need to see anything else, or going to grab the EPLAY stats and say, oh shit, he hit 25 points against Fairfax and he hit 5. Let's take him. But it's going to be another tool or another element in the decision-making process. Do we offer this kid, or do we want to offer this kid, or long-term? I guarantee you, 1 to 2 years from now, I'll be telling, my NBA clients are going to be, well, I saw him a bunch of events. Go to Baller TV, you can access video, or to go to the EPLAY website and subscribe to their thing, and you can get statistical breakdowns on, a lot of the major events, regular season or grassroots or camp or all-star games, and you could actually see, shit, he played in the top 30 game at Pangos or whatnot, all-star game, and he hit, 10 of, whatever. So, again, you see things like that, and I think short-term, again, as we talk, college recruiters see the stats, or a parent can take the statistical program and accumulate the statistical profile for their son, or a coach could do it, a high school coach could do it for their player, and use that to attract college coaches, where college coaches can look at it themselves and be drawn. So again, I think it's twofold: the players and their parents and coaches, the college coaches, recruiters who pursue the players, and then going forward as the players who've been exposed and been a part of the EPLAY system and the events that they've played in, going forward when they become draft ready or MBA ready or MBA being evaluated ready. I think, EPLAY, like Baller TV, any of the video companies, people like myself, anybody else who can kind of create or provide an element to help in the process selection. Again, because we go back, a college coach makes 3 or 4 bad, staff makes bad recruiting decisions in basketball. 2 or 3 years from later, they're fired.
Mm-hmm.
An NBA makes bad decisions, staff makes a bad decision, they're fired and the coach is fired. So when you have what's at stake, it'd be foolish not to apply or pursue any element that you think could help in that decision to make it a sounder decision, a more prudent decision that long-term, pays. And, the player's successful, the team's successful, the scout and GM are obviously successful, and everybody's happy.
All we wanted is a seat at the table. That's it. And I think that I think based on what you said, Frank Burlison says we might deserve one. We might deserve, especially in it's our time to shine now in this unprecedented thing that we're dealing with right now. It's folks like companies like ours, people that want to do what we do, which is help players get exposure, help players that may or may not slip through the cracks at times, let their numbers speak for themselves as opposed to having numbers used against them, which has been the case for a long period of time, especially in contract negotiations at the pro level and everything else. Here's why we can't pay you. Well, wait a minute. There's a whole other list of things here that say I'm a pretty efficient basketball player, a pretty efficient athlete. Frank, we're up against it, man. This has gone by really, really fast. I want to talk to you all day long about basketball, but I have to ask you this before we get out of here. I know you're a big Beatles fan. I throw this at a lot of people in my personal life. Power rank the Beatles for me. Power rank them. Who's top Beatle to number 4?
Well, I'm a John Lennon guy. I grew up to this day. Before the show, we spoke about things that happened that live with you that, are etched in your memory forever. And certainly I remember Dave Willinger, a friend of mine, we had actually eaten at one of the last times I actually ate at McDonald's after work, and I was driving home listening to the radio in 1980, December of 80. And I remember, I'm thinking, God, this is the day before classic radios and stuff like that. So you heard what were the hits then. And going, yeah, they played like 4 or 5 Beatles songs and they're all cool. And hear the news. Again, this was before social media, so it's not like you could look on your phone and see a news alert. And they said John Lennon was shot to death, and then going home and then watching the TV, and I just heart-wrenching again. And again, and then that beyond, certainly to this day, I listen to the Beatles every day, but Lennon and McCarthy, it's hard to be like saying it, if you wanted to do it, it's it's like a Magic Johnson, Bird, LeBron and Kobe, or Michael Jordan, and whatever. I see the best in both. Certainly, they were unique individuals, even though their legacies are always going to be tied together. But
sure.
Lennon, certainly McCarthy, and I think maybe not so much as of late, because Scorsese did the great documentary on George Harrison. But I think George Harrison, if you take him uniquely, the songs he wrote and performed, and I think, people who know more about drumming and the importance of drums in a pop or rock band certainly say that Ringo was vastly underrated. But I think it's not too far to say that, if you look at what Wilt and Kareem and Oscar Robertson and Bird and Magic have done for basketball, certainly the Beatles as an entity and then as individual entities, certainly, I mean, the Little Richard, or who died recently, or Chuck Berry, or the people who influenced the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and things like that. Certainly, they got their influences that shaped who they are, but certainly the Beatles, and again, I'm not into hyperbole, but certainly, almost, as someone said, almost any element or a pop music or any kind of music owes a great deal to the Beatles, not so much for how they played, but the way they did things. I mean, they were the first group of individuals that ultimately wrote all their own, not really music so much, but they wrote their own lyrics and stuff. And, George Martin did a lot of the music stuff because they weren't classically trained musicians in terms of the style of their albums that they put out, the themes that they put on, the way their songwriting matured over the course of when they were very young in the late 50s through, when they broke up. And again, people always say, the Rolling Stones were better. The thing is, when you look at the actual time that the Beatles were a group, it really wasn't that long, 10 years ago. But I think once you factor in not only what they did as a group, but what Lennon did as a solo artist, what McCartney did as a solo artist, what George Harrison did as a solo artist, when you throw that whole mix into, the Beatles as an entity, what they created, the sound they created, what they did for the industry, it's I think they're peerless. A year ago this time, we had a chance. My wife and I, Julie, went to Great Britain, and we actually had a chance we stayed like 3 days in Liverpool, so you see where they grew up and everything, and then actually went into London the last couple of days and actually went to Abbey Road. It's definitely, it's something. Again, I think every generation is always going to discover the Beatles individually and collectively and appreciate them. I think, myself and somebody like you obviously do.
Oh, I absolutely love them. Yeah, I grew up listening to a certain style of music. My musical taste tree sort of started with like Clapton and Cream and classic rock, and then it sprouted and branched off from there into my own sort of thing. But bands like the Beatles, once I saw that, or when I read that about you, it's like, I got to ask him, because I always get surprised. I'm a George Harrison I love George Harrison, so I was always a George.
Well, think about Jamie. Think about George Harrison again. The Beatles, McCartney, Lennon are peerless, but again, something. While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Oh, yeah, that's one of the greatest songs ever done.
I mean, something, maybe the greatest love song ever written, and it was George Harrison, who in theory was the third man on the totem pole again.
For sure.
That unique thing, like I think like athletes come together to form a team. Certainly the proximity that these guys and how they fell together as a group, and obviously again George Harrison and Brian Epstein in terms of the way he marketed them and things added to the equation. But again, I can't if you're a true music fan, you've got to have you've got to have a strong foundation in terms of what the Beatles were. And if you're a basketball fan, you've got to appreciate Jordan and Kareem and Magic and Bill Russell and Will Chamberlain and everybody that's done everything over the course of 5 decades or whatever in basketball.
Basketball and Beatles with Burlison today here on the EPLAY Numbers Tell Your Story podcast. It's been a fantastic one. I have learned so much. I want to have you back on because I could do this all day, Frank. I could talk basketball. I could talk stuff with you all day long. It would be great.
We can hit classic and modern media, cinema if you want to, brother.
Next time, absolutely. I noticed you're a Scorsese. You mentioned Scorsese and the Godfather movies and Serpico that's not. I was thinking of Al Pacino, but obviously there's a tie in there somewhere. Absolutely, I want to have you back. We can talk classic movies. We can talk more basketball, more player development stuff. I've absolutely. Anytime that you're available, I want to have you back on. He's Frank Burlison. You can follow him on Twitter at Frankie Burr, FrankieBur, at Frankie Burr on Twitter. You can also go to burlisonbasketball.com, Burlison, Burlison.
Yeah, Burlison on basketball.
What did I say? Burlisononbasketball.com. Sorry, burlisononbasketball.com to check out more and learn more about the great Frank Burlison, who's been our guest here today. Thank you again. Go to EPLAY Basketball, eplaybasketball.com to find out more about how you can get involved with EPLAY or learn more about what it is that we're trying to do to revolutionize the game of basketball. But also follow us on Twitter on Instagram and Twitter at EPLAY Basketball. And as we close here, I want to remind you again about our EPLAY Hoops at Home. Right now, you can go to eplaybasketball.com/hoops at home to find out more. Frank Burlison, thank you so much.
Take care, Jimmy. It's been a pleasure, brother.
This is Brandon Dean, NBA Skills Trainer and Director of Player Development for EPLAY. Over the next few weeks, we'll be putting out a series of challenges for our Hoops at Home Challenge. These challenges will simulate drills performed at our EPLAY Combines as well as drills performed at the NBA Combine. This week's challenge is the shuttle run. For this drill, you will need 3 place markers set up 8 feet apart, simulating the paint in the NBA. We will begin by starting at the middle cone. We will call this cone 1. When the clock starts, you will explode out to cone 2. Once you reach that cone, you must transition into sprinting across the lane to cone 3 and finish the drill by sprinting across the lane back to cone 2. Remember, this is timed, so every second matters. Now that you have those tips, go ahead and give it a try. Challenge yourself to be the best you can be. Look forward to seeing your results.
Thanks again to our guest today, Frank Burlison. Again, 2005 Hall of Fame inductee in the United States Basketball Writers Association Hall of Fame inductee, as well as a longtime scout and talent evaluator around the game of basketball and football as well for more than 4 decades. That was a lot of fun, and we look forward to having Frank back to tell us more stories and learn as much as we can from him. That's part of the idea behind this show, behind our desire to bring you guys good content and education on analytics and the game of basketball and anything that we can do. We encourage you guys to go to eplaybasketball.com to learn more about ePlay, learn more about what we can do to help you improve your game and maximize your hustle, take your game to the next level and get you some exposure. If you're a coach, if you're a parent, doesn't matter. We can help all of you. eplaybasketball.com. Also, our Hoops at Home challenge. You can go to eplaybasketball.com/hoops at home. Again, my thanks to Frank Burlison. You can follow him on Twitter at Frankie Burr, FrankieBur, and you can follow me on Twitter at EPlayJamie. Again, Jamie Horton. Until next time.